If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back. We have a former officer commanding Special Forces Brigade with us, General Bornman. We call him sometimes Uncle Boris, but we don't tell him that, it's behind his back, it's an Afrikaner thing. But for you people listening,
No, don't worry.
General Bornman. Now, I'm glad to say to you, he's a man with a fascinating knowledge of history. We love it. We love history in this place. And today he says to me he's going to talk about some long forgotten South African Airways hijacking which took place. Sir, welcome again. Thank you for coming. Over to you. We're listening.
Koos, thank you very much. The hijacking of SAA, are you talking about Dudu Ngeni, or are you talking about Khalil's hijacking? I'm joking. Dudu Ngeni hijacked the whole of SAA, but that is for the courts to decide. I just made a nasty remark on that. Because when I talk about the Khalil situation, I want to tell you that it's the long arm of coincidence. Obviously, I wasn't involved in this hijacking. I was still a lieutenant then. It was in 1972. We were in the outskirts of Pretoria doing a tactical exercise with our troops. In other words, a scenario, a narrative was sketched, and we had to solve this problem. And we saw this Boeing flying over us. And just after that, 2 Mirages followed it. Oh, the Mirages came back. Well, what do? We in the veld, we know nothing. That evening, we learned about this hijack. Now, apparently, it was 2 guys from Libya. The one guy called Khalil. I can't recall the other guy's name, but he came from Lebanon, and he hijacked this aircraft. And he told them to fly into Africa. Now, that's the first part of the thing. Then there was a Rhodesian officer called Tol Janneke. And in his talk about his career in the Rhodesian Air Force, he told Hannes Wessels that he flew with a hunter. Obviously, they all knew about this, this hijacking. And he flew with a hunter underneath the Boeing. Obviously, Khalil and his cohorts couldn't see that the hunter was underneath it. And that was now going over the Rhodesian soil right into Malawi. And Tol spoke in Afrikaans to the pilots of SAA and said, what's going on? And they told him, I've got this lunatic here, and he forces us now to go and land in Lilongwe in Malawi. Obviously, Janneke ran into the airspace of Malawi and he turned back. He couldn't do anything. I mean, he could shoot down the Boeing, yeah, but that's not the solution. Okay, this Boeing landed in Malawi, and the then President Hastings Banda ordered his army to go and sort out this nonsense. And the order was given when Khalil was standing on the open door. The Malawian troops opened fire with AKs. A few bullet holes went through the Boeing, but they surrendered. These 2 guys surrendered. They patched up the Boeing got back, and they arrested these 2 guys. I'm not going to go into the trial and all these things, but that was it. Then President Banda was so impressed with his Brigadier Mawati that he made him a general. Now, this is the one part of the story which is the crux around everything that happens. In 1978, a Rhodesian officer visited us, Colonel Brody. I was a major then at the Danitron Combat School, and that evening in the pub, we stood there, and Brody told us that a friend of his is coming. I said, he's welcome. Now, Colonel Brody, in the early and middle years 60s, was a lieutenant in the Nyasa army. which was part of the Federation of Sir Roy Walensky. They had an army in Northern Rhodesia, in Malawi, and in Rhodesia. That was the federal army of the Federation of the three countries that I've mentioned. He was a lieutenant there. And he was there also with a certain Lieutenant MacDonald. And he said, this Lieutenant MacDonald is coming to visit him tonight. I said, that's great. I'd like to hear the stories, you know. After a while, a gentleman knocked on the door, which is uncommon to come into a pub. And he said, please, gentlemen, is there a Colonel Brody in the pub? Obviously, they haven't seen each other for over 15 years. And obviously, Brody saw this guy and they recognized each other. Being two lieutenants in the Nyasa army, they were very happy. And the two guys were happy and they started talking and so on. Then this colonel told me a fascinating story. He said that this General Mwati was his platoon sergeant. And he was working with De Beers Consolidated Mines. And he went in Malawi 2-3 years ago. And he decided to go and visit his old platoon sergeant, who now was the chief of the Malawian army. And he knocked on the door and he opened the door. And up jumped this general and said, "Hello, Lieutenant, how are you?" And he saluted this lieutenant. And they were good friends and state friends still today, if they still all alive. But it just shows you the long arm of coincidence. We saw it in the veld. Tol Janneke spoke in Afrikaans, which is unbecoming of a Rhodesian pilot because he is Afrikaans speaking, Tol Janneke. And really, if you have an interview with him, ask him about this thing. I'm not going to say any more, but it's a brilliant story. And then the landing there, and old Khalil just handed up. And you know, Koos, apart from Dudu and Ngeni's hijacking of SAA, that was the only hijacking that we ever had in South Africa. And we are very, very fortunate. Nobody got injured. Not even old Khalil, but he just gave himself up, him and his cohorts. And yeah, soldiers will always be friends. And could you see the long arm of coincidence running through this whole story? This is to me, it's a beautiful thing. Very, very, very interesting. But please ask Tol Janneke to tell you that story.
Yes, I'm glad to tell you, sir. We have approached Tol Janneke. We haven't got the answer yet, but if he's listening here or somebody, sir, you're most welcome here with us. I think it is Prop Caldenes who said he will contact us. And Prop is also a fantastic person. But 1972 was really a year where there were a lot of hijackings of aircraft across the world.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it was seasoned for that.
Especially
landing in Cuba and all these places.
Yes.
Yeah, no.
And they also say that's where Swiss Air, through their government, actually, the Swiss government, then made an arrangement, I would call it a damn bribe, with the PLO. And whether they were money laundering, that's what I think, or whether they were just paying them, supporting terrorism. No Swiss Air aircraft's ever been hijacked again. It's very, very convenient. So in the intelligence circles where I come from, I guarantee you, we think of a Swiss Air and Switzerland as bribing the PLO not to attack the aircraft. But now I must ask you something, sir. You were a commander of special forces. And obviously hijackings aircraft will fall under you. If it's outside the country, I believe. It's inside South Africa, the police special task force will probably deal with it. But would you ever consider giving an order to shoot down an aircraft if you believe it might be intending to fly into a school or a hospital or something like that? What goes through your mind as a senior officer when such an occasion arises?
Of course, a very difficult situation. It depends on the scenario. I'm just glad I don't have to give that order because, you know, you're going to kill innocent people as well. but we must look at the bigger picture. And let's go back to Twin Towers in America. If they knew, but that happened so fast. But normally that command will be a political command, and I'm thinking of presidential and perhaps at the chief of the defense forces level, what to do, because there are so many lives involved. I'm just glad I was never. Our special forces troops were trained in anti-hijacking, whether here or abroad or whatever the case might be. We had a mock-up, and we did all the trainings, and we looked at all the television clips of hijackings and how they all ended and this type of thing, because it's a very difficult situation. You know, the guy's got a bomb in the Boeing, and you've got to decide what are you going to do, because there's always passengers. They will never hijack an empty plane. They will always hijack a plane full of people, because that's their bonus. That's the shield that they hide behind, are the people. And I think a very good example, and it's a classical example, was the Entebbe raid. I've been on that airdrome there at Entebbe, which is still the place for aircraft to land in Uganda, but it's on a newer area. But I've walked around on the old Entebbe place, and I've in my mind revisited that whole Entebbe raid, and you still see the marks, the bullet marks on the buildings and all this. But that was a classical, if ever there was a classical. And you know, the guy that was killed there, the commander of special forces, Yanni Netanyahu, his brother was the president of Israel till the other day, Benjamin Netanyahu. And he was also, in his younger day, he was a lieutenant in their special forces. But Yanni was his brother. Yeah, these things are very interesting. But thank heavens I never got to that stage.
It's really fascinating, because I recall at 9/11 they did get a couple of Air Force fighters up, but they didn't have any ammunition, nor did they have any missiles. They were that unprepared. And at one stage they were thinking, or perhaps they did order the pilots to ram these Boeings or whatever aircraft they used to fly with. I don't know if it's a Boeing or an Airbus or whatever, but they were seriously thinking in that direction. So I think the only instance I know about where a hijacking took place, sort of, was with an attack on the ship, actually, the Achilles Laura or something. And there they murdered a US Navy diver and a few others. And then they were let go, and they got on an aircraft to fly to safety. But they made that mistake to be alone on that aircraft, only the pilots and themselves. So the US Navy intercepted them with the F-14s, forced them to land at the friendly NATO base, and arrested all of them. So they can't really do that. But now I have to ask you, sir, do you recall the Seychelles affair?
Yeah, of course I do.
With Mike Ward. Can you tell us about that? Because that was almost an incident. I mean, they did get back to Durban, and they were surrounded by, I think, the Railway Police Special Forces, Special Task Force, and then they surrendered.
Yeah, the Railway Police had a very good task force, and obviously the SAA, Department of was in there, and they also did a lot of training in that. Yeah, no, that's all that I know. And they were also, because luckily I wasn't involved in that in that one, but there were a few ex-special forces guys involved in the situation to overthrow the government there. There were a lot of inquiries afterwards, and people got into trouble of issuing ammunition to them and this type of thing. But again, politics. That was politics, to try and get an ally there, and it didn't work. But another interesting thing that happened in South Africa was, In the late 70s, Lieutenant Antonio de Bomba, Mozambican pilot, defected from Maputo to South Africa. And interesting, okay, he defected and he landed and he was taken up by us. I met him and I spoke to him quite a while, but not on his defection, but just as a person. But a friend of mine at Mariepskop, he had another friend there, and he wanted to phone this friend of his about arrangements for the weekend, completely civil matter. And he was trying to get the guy and he couldn't get hold of him and he couldn't get hold of him. And he tried that number and this number and he knew all the numbers there. And after about 2 hours, he got through to a secretary. And she just said to him, listen, we are busy with a MiG from Mozambique. Stop phoning us. And that whole command center was involved in that. Luckily, they picked him up quite early. It was a very good exercise as well, and he had no armament on his aircraft. And the old MiG was so old that South African to Mozambique, but it was a whole thing. I think he just made it over the board. But these things are very interesting. But hey, if you think of 9/11, how many people lost their lives there? And this happened under the nose of all the intelligence organizations there in America.
Well, they were not listening, sir, because there was a previous attempt. In 94, I believe that Air France aircraft was hijacked in North Africa, and it was supposed to be flown into the French presidency. And the pilots told these hijackers they needed fuel, so they landed at Marseille. And there, French Special Forces told them, and they got the aircraft free. That was the first time that we realized that there might be such attacks. And I mean, it happened before. If you look at history, you will remember the kamikaze pilots of the Second World War.
Yeah.
Where they flew
the kamikaze pilots.
But this was, of course, a commercial aircraft being used as a flying bomb. Now, there was one funny thing, very funny incident about that particular rescue at Marseille, is that if you look at the videos, and if I can find a clip, I'll put it in here if I'm allowed to do it legally. When the French Special Forces came in, they came with one of these stairways, and they ran with it into the door at the front. But they couldn't open that door, because the door opens
from inside.
From inside to out, for air pressure reasons. Yeah. So what happened was their stairways were too high. So they had to move the stairs back a little bit so the door could open and then forward again. And so one guy was hanging here on the door. He fell down, and as he fell, he started running already to get up again. It was fantastic. The snipers were shooting into the cabin all the time, just next to them, because they knew some hijackers were there. And the mistake they made, and it's funny now, but it wasn't then. They were practicing on aircraft which were empty of fuel, empty of people, empty of baggage. And because of that, they had this thing too high, because the aircraft empty stands higher than the aircraft which is loaded. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And so we learned the lesson there. And then on Entebbe, something else came out too, which was fascinating, because what they did here is they would separate the Jews away from the, let's say, the non-Jews. Now, of course, if you want to know who's a Jew, you just look at him, pull the pants down and see if everything is still there, because the circumcision normally in that part of the world is seen as a Jewish thing. It's not true, by the way. Most American men would also be, cut. No logical reason.
It's common practice in South Africa as well.
Yeah, so I say to people always, if you're ever in such a situation, you have a damn good reason why you might be circumcised or not. Now, they will also check, of course, your passport, look at your name, things like that. That was in the 70s, and that's what happened at Entebbe. So they released basically all of them except the poor Jews were kept there, Israelis and Jews were kept in that building which you visited. Now it's a fantastic story how they got there. They had a fake limousine. They did really, really well. If you want to read about it, read Codename Wrangler. That is the book which George and James wrote on aircraft rescues, and it's one of the scenarios which he looked at in great detail. But that's where we got the principle, which they call the Entebbe principle, where they would go in and they would shout in the language of the rescuers to stay down and to lie down. Now, obviously, these guys were shouting in Hebrew. And there were a French Jew who emigrated to Israel a little bit before, and he didn't quite understand what they were saying, and he got up and they shot him dead. And that became known as the Entebbe principle. So if you are hijacked by and you're flying South African Airways, if they still exist, there's a very good chance that the guys rescuing you are going to say to you, vol plot, there. In Afrikaans, they're going to tell you to go down and to stay. If it's a Russian aircraft, of course, Tesla is going to arrive. A British one is not a big problem. American is not a big problem. But that really depends. I mean, it's also who that aircraft is flagged to, is the guys who will come and rescue you. So if you're flying, say, El Al aircraft, you're in good hands, very good hands, because we trust the Israeli Special Forces. Fly, say, Nigeria Air. I've got nothing against Nigerians. I love them. But I wouldn't want to be rescued by a Nigerian SEAL, especially if not trained by the US. If he's trained by the US, I don't want him close to me because he'll just screw up. In the last 12 years, about Western Special Forces, and I'm excluding the French now, could only rescue one hostage alive in sub-Saharan Africa. They are that pathetic for many, many reasons. So you have to be careful on what aircraft you're flying. So I'm glad we're speaking about this because, you know, there might be people here who wants to, now that COVID is sort of not the bad anymore, thank God, who wants to fly. Don't say 500 rands on an aircraft ticket. Rather fly with the big airlines, you know, the ones which you know, if there comes a trouble, the people who's going to rescue you, you know, they might actually know what they're doing. But no, you as the Special Forces General, sir, you know that.
No, you are more than right. Another distinction at Entebbe from the Jews to the non-Jews was that the non-Jews all got stomach problems due to bad food. You know, it's very hot and all these things, and the Jews stuck to kosher food. And they didn't pick up stomach problems. All the other people running tummies and they vomited and all this. So that just a small little interesting part. And then old Laura Bloch, the old woman that was ill, never found again.
Yes, that's a very sad story, sir. She wasn't at the rescue because it's an old Tanny, dual British Israeli citizenship. They took her to a hospital and they say Idi Amin and these people shot her dead right inside that bed. But by this time, these people were gone. And that's a problem when you give an order to attack that aircraft from Special Forces side. There might be, you know, unintended consequences. The same at Marseille. 3 priests who were held captured somewhere else were executed because of this. So there's always a comeback. But, you know, terrorism now has evolved, sir. In 2010, there was an attack in Nairobi, in Kenya, on the mall. And,
that's right, I know about that one.
And they say there's a white woman who's actually beside it, who was behind it, Samantha Waite or something. I can never say a name, but she's known as a white widow or something like that. She might be dead, she might not be. The Americans say they got her by a drone strike. Some of the intelligence sources say she's still alive and she's still somewhere. She was definitely in South Africa at some stage. She was hiding out in one of the areas. I'm not going to mention the name, doesn't matter, but it came to my attention. Now that was the first time which we saw that the jihadis, and they are very, very small people, percentage of the Muslim people. Don't take what I'm saying now as anti-Islam. Don't do that. Very, very small part. and terrorists. And they went out and they would ask you questions about the Quran. And if you cannot answer, they kill you. So they've evolved now from where they look at your manhood to see whether you've been circumcised and that your passport by just grabbing you and asking you these questions. And that is really bad news because most people here will not be able to answer questions on the Quran.
No, that's true. By the way, Muslims also circumcise. They also believe in circumcision. I mean, it comes from Ishmael and Abraham, and of course Isaac from biblical times.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's no, I'm fully aware of that. And then, of course, we should also differentiate between the Sunni group as well as the Shia. And it's fascinating to me that in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, which I know well because I worked there for many years, it's the Sunni group whose mosques are rising everywhere. And these mosques,
that's right.
if you look at these mosques, if you read the book of George and James codename Wednesday 7, if you read that book, you will find out that they can actually look at the mosque physically, and you can see who paid for it. And you can see where the money comes from. And 99.99% this will come from Saudi Arabia, that great friend of the West, of America. And it's fascinating to me also so that ISIS, as well as Al-Qaeda, are Sunnis. They hate the Iranians and their Shia, which they call a faction. They hate each other. And yet, if you look at things from a higher viewpoint, from a global scale, according to the West, the enemy is the Shia and not the Sunni. It makes no sense. And again, I want to say, we don't have anything against Muslims. Do not put words in my mouth. I'm just telling you from a counterterrorism view, because the general and myself are discussing this now. What are the facts? And if you don't believe me, go and research.
Yeah, we live in a crazy world. There's, of course, another hijacking phenomenon apart from the South African scene is the hijacking at seas, especially the Somalian coast and on the Mozambican coast. But that's a program for another day. Then in South Africa, we've got car hijackings, which is thriving. And just 2 days ago, our police attacked a safe house where 25 of these thugs were. Most of them come from Zimbabwe. There was one guy from Botswana. There are military. The one guy that was killed was an ex-soldier. There are ex-policemen in there. And they hid in this house and it was attacked. 4 policemen were wounded, but they're all right. Thank God, therefore. And of the thugs, they killed 8. 9 got away. They've already apprehended 2. A lot of weapons, explosives, and this type of thing. But in the quiet suburb of Rosettenville, there was a big clash 2 days ago. But well done to the South African police, who I think need credit at this stage. But I'm so glad that they could wipe out. Of course, but they the cash and transit hijackers. What can a cash and transit van do against 25 armed guys? They run up in numbers. But I mean, tomorrow, there's just another group. And last night I listened to a guy and he said the problem with criminality in South Africa, and we are now deviating from hijacking, is that there are people in the crime circuits which are in institutions like the government, the police, the army, and so forth. And once we've stopped that, the crime will go down. And that's the problem. It's a logic thing for criminal gangs to corrupt officials. I mean, this is the first line in the textbook of the mafia is corrupt officials. I mean, that's so logic in the criminal world. But we live in very difficult times, very crazy times.
You're 100% correct. So I wrote a book called Safety Net. It's on the
Yes,
book
yes, yes.
somewhere. And we deal with these type of things and what you can do and should do and shouldn't do and how to survive. I remember in my time as a young attorney, we got the idea that these criminal gangs are controlled. Now, obviously, they're controlled by the gang leader, but I meant in a higher level.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
then
yes.
as you talk to the guy you're defending, you realize this fellow has a bit of military training from somewhere, but he wasn't in the military. Some of them. Some of them were actually. Some of them came from other countries where they were in the military. And then we realized, after talking to many of them, we came to the conclusion that there's actually a syndicate in South Africa which specializes in training. So they would act as a sort of intelligence crime unit, but doing crime. Where they would say to these guys, okay, right, you want to hijack a truck, fine, we take 10%. Do you know how an AK-47 works? Well, we'll rent one to you with a whole bunch of bullets, and we will train you in the use of it. And that is why you see these tactical moves of it. Now, the good news about that is you can immediately see it. I mean, if you have any type of military training and you see the way people move, you can recognize a soldier, I'm sure. So you will agree with me. You can recognize a soldier anywhere. And that is dangerous because there were apparently a few intelligence officers planning these operations for them. But then, of course, I went on to other things, and this is more than 20 years ago. It might still be the same today. But it's a horrible situation to walk into that type of thing. It's not a normal criminal. I mean, people say criminals can't shoot. Well, they shoot enough people to argue about that, but normally they shoot much worse than what a trained soldier will shoot. So if this guy is trained, he's got an advantage here.
Well, Koos, to echo your point, in this clash in Rosettenville, they even fired at the police helicopter. The pilot was wounded. I mean, where does this come from? Where does this come from? Zimbabwe, Angola. I'm going to use words. SWAPO did it. I mean, in Rhodesia, it was on the order of the day to shoot at the helicopters. So why did this guy do it? Was he in a corner, and only way that he could get out was this? The helicopter wasn't armed. It was just a police helicopter for command and control. But you're more than right. Another thing that they do, when they group a gang to do a cash in transit heist, they get guys from various areas. They don't know each other. If you catch one, he can't tell you that the other guy that was here that ran away, his name is this and this and this. He doesn't know the guy. They don't know each other. And then they do a rehearsal. They don't use names. And they just go in and they do it and they get their cut successful. If he knows nothing. He doesn't even know the last man's name and this type of thing. It's the way that they cover themselves. It's a bad world that we live in. But if we can just stop these inside jobs, it will go much better with us. Yeah.
This actually has to do with hijacking, sir, because even if you are held at gunpoint for your car to be robbed, or in your house, or your house is being robbed, you are a hostage. Even if it might not be, say, for 2 years in a row or 10 months, but for that few minutes or that hour or two, you're absolutely a hostage, and you should know what to do and what not to do.
You're a hostage. You're a hostage. You're a hostage. Here where I live, talking of criminality, the 2 farms away from us, now for 5 consecutive times, they've stolen the cable from the pump to the house where the electricity is from Eskom, to get the pump to start and to pump water for the cultivations and for the house. They put in a new cable. 2-3 days after that, that cable is gone. 5 times now. You tell me there's no inside job in this. Either the guys who replace the cable, or who supplies the cable, or even from that farm, there's an informer telling these guys, hey, here's some cash being buried again. You must just come and lift it. And you know, cable is a very expensive thing, and to lay it is not an easy job. No, it's a problem that we have. It's a problem that we have.
Well,
They go and sell that for scrap iron.
there was something called the Dr. Zinn report, which you can find online. Now, Dr. Zinn, if I understand correctly, was a former South African Police Force detective. And then he did a PhD in something, and he wrote a report called the Zinn report. Now, the Zinn report is where he went to jail. He actually went to visit these people who committed these crimes. And he said to them, well, you know, you're not going to get out of this jail. Tell me how do you do these things? And from that, we could figure out exactly how they do these things. Now, okay, I say again, this report is 20 years old, but I understand it hasn't really changed. I discuss it in great detail in I think the Safety Net book, but it might have been another one as well, on the legacy books. And there, so he came out and said that 80% of the time, that's 8 out of 10. So I'm tempted to say almost always. There is an inside job. Now, it's not to say that the guy who's betraying you or the woman wants to do that. No, there might be blackmail and violence and drugs and all sorts of other things happening in the background. But from a legal viewpoint, that means that whoever works for you, whoever is there on your farm,
Oh yes,
must sign a clause to say that he can be, that he must be able to undergo a lie detector test. Now, that's not evidence in court.
yeah.
And if you're trained well enough, you
not-
can succeed to manipulate this thing. But most people cannot. But it's a good indication of who was involved and who was not involved. And that's the first thing which the investigator will do. But he can only do that if you have it in your contracts. And if you don't have it in your contracts, stop. You can refuse and that's it. But if he has it in his contract and he refuses, you can fire him legally. Well, that's why I'm a lawyer used to be. I'm not giving legal advice. I'm not an attorney anymore. I'm just telling you that is one of the ways which we combated it.
I know this Zinn report we've studied. It's Professor Zinn. He's at the University of South Africa. He's he trains these certificates and degrees that policemen can go. Well-known criminologist now. No, that is very true. No, it's an inside job, either by force or willingly. If you treat your laborers bad, it's easier for them to tell a friend, to phone a friend.
But I have to say, the only thing which stands between you and abuse from the state is the law. And the law sadly is nothing but a piece of paper. So if you don't invoke the law and bend it towards your own favor, the law cannot help you. It's that simple. I think on Legacy Legal, we have this, no one ever watches it. But we actually have a Legacy Legal channel where I speak as a former attorney and a highly experienced one, where I speak to people about legal matters. And that's one of the things which I always say. And then the professors, bless their souls, their eyes go this big when you say to them something like, you can bend the law. But that's what happens every day. I mean, you take it and you make it to work for you on your side. The problem is, the damn problem here is once people start thinking the law is not working, that there's no justice, or that people do not abide by court orders, that's where you see civil unrest. That's where you see people saying, well, if the law's not going to help me, then I'll help myself. And then you start talking vigilantes, and that is a serious road to go on. And that's one which we don't condone at all. It's better to
in
get
South
your faith in
Africa,
the courts.
in South Africa, in our townships, on a weekly basis, there are instances of vigilantes where people take the law in their own hands and they kill child molesters, murderers, thieves, and even zamazamas. They take the law in their own hands. And you are so right. It is not right that there should be a law and the law must go its course. But yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, there's no due process. You don't know how fair it is. I mean, they accuse these people of that, but it's not to say they're actually guilty. They might be, but it's not to say. I mean, it's the same thing. I tried to explain to the Europeans here that you do get something like witchcraft in Africa. And then every now and
Of
then
course.
you see a witch has been burnt. Her heart, everything, she's been burnt to death. All right, and then you arrive as a policeman and you arrest these people who committed the crime. And they simply do not understand why you're arresting them, because they see it as
Precisely.
a pre-strike. What do you call it? There's a military term for that too, where you attack first because you have no choice. Otherwise, she will do something to you. That's Africa. It's a different type of policing, and it's wrong.
Absolutely.
Don't misunderstand me again. Don't put words in my mouth which is not there. We do not condone violence ever. So it shouldn't happen.
No, you are more than right on this one. We've had various instances in this, especially in Venda. The people are very superstitious. If lightning strikes a hut, they just say that is a witch. That's why the lightning strikes. We know it's an act of God, not witchcraft. And then there are consequences, big consequences. Yeah, but our whole history is full of this. People being tortured and killed for nothing, innocent.
Well, we can only hope that things will get better and this will come to an end and there will be peace. I must say, since I'm married to Rebecca, I'm quite for peace. She's a very peaceable type, you know, do not believe in violence. Of course, we don't believe in violence officially either, but let me tell you, off the record, sometimes it's needed. Sometimes it's needed. Well, Internet, we came to an end of this episode. We started talking about hijackings. We then started talking about other things. You know what? I like talking to the general. Always nice to explore his mind. Thank you for that, sir. Thank you to all of you who are listening here to us. Let me say to you once again, you are not unimportant. Don't ever think you are unimportant. That's the enemy talking. You put on the uniform, you went and served. It doesn't matter if you didn't see a contact. It doesn't matter if you weren't a great hero in your own eyes. To us, you know what, man? You're welcome here with us. Come and tell your story. So until we meet again, God bless.
Thank you, Koos. Bless you.